Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, CPS, and other court issues. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, and today I have two guests on. I have attorney Michelle MacDonald and I have Mr. M.Volpe on. And we are going to talk about the book, the Sandra Grazzini-Rucki and the World's Last Custody Trial, which was written by attorney Michelle MacDonald and M.Volpe. And I welcome you to the show, and I'm glad you both are here so we can learn how this all came about. How are you all?
I'm good.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Marianne. I'm doing great. And Michael, so nice to hear your voice.
Right. Yeah, Michelle and I have known each other for a long time.
I haven't talked to you in a while, so I'm really excited.
It's been a few months, but yeah.
We talk pretty regularly.
Right. All right. So you wanted us to explain the book?
Most definitely. How long did it take to write, and to get together and to write this book?
It took probably a little bit less than a year, and it went through several different ideas. It actually started as like several different stories from Michelle's professional life, except the other ones, in my opinion, were more boring than this one, which actually is good for the people because even though they were in a corrupt process, it wasn't quite to this extent. But and so Michelle agreed to just make it, because Sam, that's what Sandra Grazzini-Rucki goes by, her story is almost impossible to tell in anything but like very, very long and involved because there's so many different things that happen. And so I think we started towards the end of 2015 and probably finished, I think it was October of 2016 was when it was published.
Now,
but how it came about is I had heard Michael on a radio show, a show like yours, and he was talking about his book Bullied to Death, the Chris Macney story, and I called him up. I said, how's that book coming along? I would like to be involved. So that's how I met Michael, and Michael actually wrote a book and I wrote the foreword to it and helped with some editing. The Bullied to Death, the Chris Macney Kafkaesque divorce. And
right,
you remember that, Michael? I called you out of the blue.
I do, but when Michelle says she helped with some editing, she's being very, very, she helped with a lot of editing. So it wasn't just it wasn't like, she took a look at a few pages. She went through multiple drafts. So that wasn't easy. She was the editor. Correct. And then we came, I don't know how quickly after all of that was finished, we came up with this idea, but sometime after that book was completed, we started working on this one.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of a trip down memory lane because I do remember wanting to write another book with you and giving you some of these other horror stories that I had. The Chris Macney story is a horror story, and Bullied to Death has several stories in it, aside from Chris Macney's, which is the main story. And then right. You became very focused on a case. It was as it was happening. I mean, when we ended the book, Sandra Grazzini-Rucki and the World's Last Custody Trial, things were still going on. We had to stop writing at some point and
right.
say, okay,
well,
we need
things,
to.
Right, we finished it after she went to jail. And she wound up going to jail again for a little while to finish off the sentence, because the way they wrote the sentence was ridiculous. But yeah, it's difficult to have an ending because it doesn't have a happy ending, at least not yet. But yeah, look, Sam and I became close, and also there's just so much corruption in this story, and it goes from the local, almost the entire Lakeville Police Department. Lakeville is where all this happened, is corrupt. Mainly Kelly Coughlin. She's on audio in an interview, trying to manage where the interview goes. All kinds of things that she did. Do you know that the chief of police over there told me I wasn't allowed to call them or do a FOIA request. Just blatantly illegal things. Jeff Long is his name. But, and all the way to the U.S. Marshals. The U.S. Marshals came in with rifles to Sam's head on a bogus warrant, on a warrant that didn't exist. They claimed that she was being charged with child trafficking, kidnapping, and something else, and she wasn't. And if she wasn't, then the U.S. Marshals shouldn't have been there. And so instead of figuring out who screwed them to put the marshals in on this woman on some like really low level warrant that nobody was actually asking her to be arrested on, they continued the pursuit. Not only were they tracking Sam, but they after the fact were like going to her employer and trying to get her fired and testifying at court hearings on her bail. So all the way from the local cops to the U.S. Marshals, everyone in between, corrupt judges, very corrupt judges, and multiple. David Knudsen is the worst. He's the one who made Michelle conduct part of the custody trial handcuffed to a wheelchair. In fact, Michelle, I think, is the only person to do a closing argument handcuffed to a wheelchair, which I think is pretty impressive.
I think so. Yes.
You know, like you hear about athletes, Kobe shot a free throw with a torn Achilles tendon. Michelle did a closing argument strapped to a wheelchair. That's like impressive in its own way. So that was David Knudsen who made Michelle do that. And one thing I should point out, though a lot has happened since the book came out that obviously is not in the book, we're extremely detailed about all of the moves that Judge Knudsen made. So blow by blow about everything that this guy did. And then it's interspersed with David's violence because, you know, Judge Knudsen would rule in his favor one day, and then like 4 days later, he's committing some act of violence. And of course he is, because you give a guy like that license, and he feels like he can get away with anything. But basically, look, the story is that Sam and her kids, she's a battered woman. Her kids were victims of physical abuse, possibly sexual abuse. And when she tried to divorce David, he used the court to legally abuse her. And he was able to do it by a judge that I believe is absolutely on the take, though we didn't make that allegation in the book. But if you read it, I don't know how else you can come to any other conclusion. I can't. I don't. But so this guy jumps on the case and just starts ruling in David's favor in more and more obscene ways until you hit September 5, 2012. And we should note, Michelle doesn't enter the story herself until early January 2013. So at this point, she doesn't even know who Sandra Grazzini-Rucki is. But I guess the court was very frustrated that the kids weren't having a good relationship with dad, and they were blaming mom. So on September 5, the court holds not a hearing because it's a telephonic conference. In fact, that's what it says on the transcript. And it was a telephonic conference because the judge may have been in the courtroom, but everybody else was by phone. And it wasn't a hearing because at a hearing, you call a witness and you ask them questions. In this, it was more like 4 or 5 people on a sofa just going back and forth. And one interesting thing was neither of the parents were there. Their lawyers were. But you would think, and this was a life-altering hearing, you would think at a life-altering hearing, you might want to have mom and dad at least, you know, participate or be on the call. But no, Judge Knudsen thought, why bother having mom and dad? So he issued a very unique order. There are orders that are in some ways similar to what he did, but it's very unique. He decided neither parent should have custody. That mom who had custody and was living in a house should move out forcefully by his coercion, and that he should move in dad's sister, who the kids barely knew. And that's what he ordered on September 7, 2012. And he gave Sam 3 hours. And he said, since your flight bag is owned by, I think, whoever she was a flight attendant with, since they own it, you can keep that and whatever you put in it, but you can't take anything else with you. So she has no photos of her kids, nothing, no personal property. And since that moment, she has effectively been homeless because of the way that he has written orders. It makes it almost impossible for her to find any sort of steady housing. And then after her conviction, she can't really get a job. So she's basically jobless and homeless. And yet, and this happened after the book came out, in 2019, they ordered her to pay $230 per month in child support. And even though an appeals court said, we agree you are jobless and homeless, they agreed. But they said that she was choosing to be, that she could make money, so they're going to pretend like she makes minimum wage, and that's how they came to $235 per month. So they presumably were doing that so they could chase after her for child support. But David Rucki got everything. And then I should note, after that September 7th order, what first happened was the kids, when they found out that mom was gone, they ran to a police station. Initially, 4 of the 5 were allowed to live with their aunt on their mother's side, but they were eventually forced to live with their paternal aunt, and they knew they were going to live with dad. The 2 oldest daughters ran. They were hidden. Mom did help hide them, though mom doesn't like the term hide. They weren't really hidden because where they were, everyone knew who they were. That's what they mean by they weren't hidden. They stayed on this horse ranch for abused children with Doug and Gina Dowland. They used their real names. They would go to like get their hair done. Everyone knew they were Samantha and Gianna. Everyone knew who, not only who they were, but who they were, meaning how they got there. No one called the police. Only Doug and Gina got charged, though David sued a bunch of people, and I heard he got a lot of money after the girls were found, because there's a court order, so David's obviously the victim, that these girls were hiding from him and people were allowing it. And at the trial, what the judge did was made sure that any evidence of abuse never made it in the trial. And Michelle can talk about this because she was at the hearing this day. There was a voicemail that David left with 6 gunshots. And this was right after David threatened to kill the entire family, which was mom and 5 kids. 1 plus 5 is 6. And so Michelle, explain what happened with the introduction of the gunshots and how the judge ruled on that.
Well, suddenly there were technical difficulties in the entire courtroom. So we were all had to leave while the technical difficulties were, and this was the criminal trial. She was, her behavior was being criminalized. And in Minnesota, we have a criminal statute that, I'm even forgetting the name of it now, that, you know, if you're keeping children away from the custodial parent, well, David Rucki wasn't the custodial parent throughout all of this, because that draconian order that Michael talked about that happened after a phone call on September 5th applied to both of them. So neither of them could have any contact with their children, even through third parties. Anyway, yes, there were technical difficulties. And as I recall, even though one of her family law attorneys had actually had testimony of the gunshots and the video and everything else, basically they could only be called, what was it, audible sounds. They couldn't be called gunshots, even though there were clearly gunshots. And there was some pretended confusion about whose phone it was. And it was just actually absurd and ridiculous that it couldn't just be presented the way actually it was.
Right, look, it was clearly gunshots. And also the local Fox affiliate, when they did a story on it, which is on my YouTube, but they called them gunshots, and they played not all 6, but they're clearly gunshots. And then there was no confusion. They traced it back. It was his phone calling Sammy, the daughter, the oldest daughter, Sammy. There's no confusion, and this is how they were trying to hide evidence of abuse, because obviously if dad is threatening to kill the family, that's a reason to protect the girls, even if a court order says they have to live with dad. And yeah, look, the crime, the so-called crime she was convicted of, I think there's maybe a handful of states that have this crime. Most of the time it's a civil violation. It would never be a civil violation. Maybe it would be, but the fact that the girls were there willingly is very, very important. And it's something that, like, either the people who believe or who are championing David Rucki, which at this point is this guy, Michael Broadcourt, they either overlook or pretend like, no, they were abducted. No, they weren't abducted. They ran. They were forced to go live at it's Ireland Place. They were forced to go live there. They were taken there, escorted by Lakeville police. They were tricked into winding up at Ireland Place because their aunts, their maternal aunt, said, we're going for pizza. And then she made a stop, and that stop was at a police station. And before they knew it, they were in an interrogation room where they were told, you're going to go live in Ireland Place with your other aunt, and then your dad will come live with you. 30 minutes after the cops left, they ran. They ran. They were not abducted. They stayed willingly, and they ran because their father is very, very abusive. He puts a gun to his kid's head, chokes one of the kids, ran his hands up Sammy's leg. This is what she described, held it there right next to her private parts. He's a great guy, wonderful dad. And the father's rights movement still protects this guy to some degree. They certainly have not gone back on their support, and and one of the reasons why I don't like them. They supported this guy. They are a reason why a lot of people still believe that she was a scorned woman and not a victim of domestic violence. The total scum. They would rather promote a father because they are fathers than promote the truth. That's the father's rights movement. So that's basically what happened. And as a result, she's homeless and jobless. He's made a lot of money. Kids are forced to live in abuse. Michelle spent 24 hours in jail, uncharged. They charged her later. The charges went away. That was the same day when she was forced to conduct part of the custody trial, handcuffed to a wheelchair. All kinds of stuff happened. All kinds of stuff happened in this case. Sam has been extradited twice from Florida to Minnesota, twice. All right, most people don't face one extradition. She has been extradited twice.
So Michael and Marianne, we talk about this case because it is such a notorious case. It's been on 2020. It's if you Google Grazzini-Rucki, you will get numerous articles about the case, numerous podcasts about the case. You'll get news stories and everything else. So we always talk about it because we know it so intimately from different perspectives. Michael, as an investigative reporter who has come to know the case very, very well, and also know Sandra and myself as her attorney, and
Right.
fighting for her right.
Right. I developed all kinds of context. So after the book came out, and there's no way I could even know that I could ever get a document like this, but I was able to, they appointed a guy, Jim Gilbertson, and Sammy made an audio recording. And in the audio recording, she described how this guy Gilbertson, number one, made her and the other children go to a court hearing. And during a break would rub her shoulders, Sammy, that is, when she was 14 and got sexually aroused. So this guy was appointed on the recommendation of another guy, Paul Reitman, and he foolishly sent his therapist notes to a third party and I eventually got those. And in those therapist notes, they effectively admit to conspiracy to force those kids to live in an abusive situation, because they are talking about that April 19th order, which was when the girls were forced to go live with Tammy, the paternal aunt. That's when they ran 30 minutes later. They were talking about that order that wouldn't come until April 19th, as early as April 9th, according to his therapist notes that I'm sure he never thought would be released. So there's so much to this story, so much corruption, and that guy has gotten away with it. No one did anything to him. They obviously didn't charge him. And even though those therapist notes exonerate Sam from any responsibility, because they show that everyone knew that this was a dangerous situation, and they forced it on the kids anyway. Her conviction hasn't been reversed. You talk to the governor's office, it doesn't matter. Let me tell you, here's a great story about just how corrupt this case is. I once did a story about Ilhan Omar, and she was saying something, and she wanted the governor's office to act, and I knew that the governor's office couldn't act because they didn't have that jurisdiction. I thought that was an interesting story because she should have known that. And that in the governor's office, and it was the liberal, the guy that used to be in Congress, the Muslim, I can't remember the guy's name. I got a statement from like staff that was his, like from him. And so that's how like reasonable and accommodating they were, even though they knew the story was going to make Ilhan Omar look bad. I asked him about Rucki and never get a response. That's not a coincidence, you know, like no one wants to talk about it. They all know that from top to bottom, there's massive corruption and no one wants to deal with it.
Yeah, it's a massive cover-up. So for those of your listeners that don't know the story, there's two aspects to this story. There's, you know, the family court story that I was involved in, and then there's also following the family court conclusion, if you could call it ever concluded. There is the criminal defense aspects. I was also her criminal defense attorney for a time when she was being extradited from Florida. But this is truly just the story of a mom who was a part-time airline stewardess married to David Rucki. They had 5 small children. And what ended up happening was they had a stipulated divorce. So the mom had an attorney. There was a stipulation for a divorce where the mom would get custody. The mom would get, I think, the main home, those kinds of things. There'd be some child support, some spousal support, as you normally might have in a stipulated situation, and that was that until at one point there was an attorney that decided to assist David in reopening the divorce a couple of months later. And that's what ended up happening. The divorce was reopened, and the way they reopen divorces here in Minnesota, they'll still keep you divorced. So the termination of the marriage is there, but all other issues become up for grabs. And that's when Sandra was defending herself, I guess you'd say. She paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to attorneys before she became, and even the attorney that represented her in that telephone conference paid an $80,000 fee, because yes, the family had resources and they had money. And when I first met Sandra, as many of you know, I had a calling to abolish, that means end, some people don't know what that means, family court, stop the culture of families litigating each other and suing each other in court. And I'd have, through Family Innocence, a nonprofit, that I have these first of the month events. So Michael had mentioned there was a draconian order. I got that word from Michael, that happened on September 7th, 2 days after this telephone call, where Sandra and her ex-husband could not have any contact with their children, even through third parties. And Sandra, this was a new twist on custody. Sandra owned the home. Her 5 children were with her. She had lived in the home for 14 years, all of the property. Just imagine 14 years of collection of all this stuff, your paperwork, your computers. You have your 5 kids. It was the first week of school. The children went to different schools, and her attorney calls her up and says, this order's coming down the pike and you have to leave your home and somebody else is going to move in and take care of your kids. So instead of, removing the children from a custodial parent, they remove the parent from the scene and bring in somebody who, is a relative, but she doesn't own the home. Sandra owns the home.
Right.
She doesn't, she doesn't have any of the
Right. Though a month later,
horrific. And in 2 hours, and then that's the way it's been since.
right, a month after that order came down, he gave the home to David. So it was one of a series of draconian orders. And the other thing is,
I beg to differ. Here's what happened with that. I'm just going to tell you the legalese that occurred. So what ended up happening is I meet Sandra at one of the Family Innocence events, and she comes to me. She was actually with that attorney Dale Nathan, and we're having kind of an event. It's at Carboni's. We have music, and she comes with Dale, and she's scared as can be. She's meeting me. She's thinking I know about the case. I guess where we had it held. She wanted to know if I knew. I didn't know anything about her, anything about the case. And that was on January 1st, 2013. I did agree for a small fee, because she was telling me about this case, to take on a constitutional challenge, because what she told me happened to her had to be unconstitutional, had to be against any type of rights that we have fundamentally. And so I did take that on. And when I did that, I filed all kinds of paperwork. I went down to the courthouse, looked at the file, because that was the best way to get it, because, she was kicked out of her house. So all of her files and everything were there. Her former attorney had withdrawn from the case, that she had paid $80,000 for that phone call. I mean, what kind of an attorney is that? And we ended up, when I filed that, I counted about 3,600 orders. I mean, what is that, right?
Right.
At the time. And how I counted the orders was, she might have had about 45 that say orders on them, but you've probably seen this many, many times. It'll say order on the top, on the caption, but then it will have several paragraphs with do this and do that, and don't forget to do this, and you got to do this by a date. And it was just horrific that nobody could follow. You follow one order, the next one would be.
Right. He once ordered Sam to leave the state, and another time ordered her to stay in the state of Minnesota. He gave her both of those orders. The orders would be contradictory. He wouldn't remember many of the orders that he gave. Many of them were oral, but he said, oral or not, they are orders. As I said, look, if he wasn't bought off, he was certainly acting like it. There's no explanation for anything that he did, except that someone paid him money under the table to do everything that he did. Yeah, he was a completely out of control judge. His favorite line is, "This is my playground. You'll do as I want." I can't say any more about him.
Michael taught me the word Kafkaesque. Any move you make, is the wrong move. And we put that in Michael's book, Bullied to Death. But that's where she was at. She couldn't make any moves. And so when I filed the constitutional challenge, I did something a little unusual. I was going to be her constitutional attorney, and she was still going to continue to do her case on her own. So when I filed my certificate of representation, I said, as to the constitutional challenge. And to Michael's point with the House, after I researched it, I saw what had happened. After I filed my constitutional challenge, Lisa Elliott filed what's called a summary proceeding relating to the home. And in Minnesota, what happens is if there's it has to be a clear order that one party's getting the home or the other. You file just a really quick document that the judge signs that says, you know, this is what the order says, and they both were represented by attorneys, which at the time Lisa Elliott filed this, they weren't, and that the home will be in David's home. So he got title to the home in that manner. That's how he got title to the home. Nobody gave him a deed, none of the normal things that happened. And so when I did the constitutional challenge, I was really, really focused, and we went in for our hearing. It was the first time I was in the courtroom. I had had some dealings with, you know, I'm in the court. I was in the courtroom. I'm in the courtroom a lot, and I was really taken aback by all the people that were in the courtroom that day. Anyway, made my argument, and Judge Knudsen denied the constitutional challenge. And when I appealed it to the appellate court here, and as you know, I've run for statewide for Supreme Court justice because the appellate courts are not doing their job. The appellate court said about that draconian order that it was only temporary. So we're just gonna deny your appeal. So imagine that. This is a temporary order that effectively removes a mother from her children, the father from the children group, and her home and all of her belongings in 3 hours, and it still was in effect. And so that was there was nothing I could do to resolve this problem. So ultimately, again, Sandra's representing herself, but I'm in court with her doing these constitutional challenges. Ultimately, the judge schedules a trial on September 11th in 2013. And the judge kind of, you know, almost, it's like, basically says, are you going to be her attorney? And I'm saying yes. And prior to that trial, I developed a team, a legal team, and we actually, because this was just such an outrageous situation, we did one of the very first federal class action civil rights family liberties lawsuits. And it was Sandra Grazzini-Rucki and her 5 children against David Knudsen in his individual capacity and several does. And the does knew who they were because I had served color of law notices on everyone, including the judge. And what a color of notice in its purest form is saying that you are, it's kind of like, you know, when the Nazis would say, well, this is just my job. You know, I have to shoot somebody because somebody up there told me to shoot somebody. It's like that. It's color of law where I'm just doing my job as a judge. I'm just doing my job as an attorney. Attorneys also are operating under color of law because they are officers of the court, right? Just like a police officer is an officer. So in any event, that's what I did, and we did file the lawsuit and serve it on September 11th, which was the first day of the world's last custody trial, which Sandra's case had been scheduled for. So we call it the world's last custody trial because by then 2 of the children she had not seen her children, or that custody order had been in effect for over a year, that draconian order, as we call it. And we had a 2-day trial, and it was the second day when I took a picture. The reason I took a picture was because the first day we had Sandra's testimony. She was the only witness. I firmly believe that the only 2 witnesses in a custody trial are really the parents, right? They're the ones that are raising the children. and they're there on a daily basis. So we had Sandra testify, and Sandra, who was following the court registry very clearly after that first day, pointed out to me that the next day was canceled. And even though the judge had told us to come back the next day, on the registry, and it's still there, it says that day 2, September 12th, is canceled, but we showed up anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the second day we showed up, it was very, very different atmosphere. Sandra was actually on the way in. They made her strip down all the way to her sports bra. So I took a picture of that. I took a picture of, I went up to the clerk and I said, because back then we did have a big screen where the cases come, but back then you still had the hand typed registry. And I just went to the clerk and she gave it to me, and I saw that Sandra's case was on for day 2. And I said, can I take a picture of this? And the clerk said yes. Then Sandra started saying, well, why don't we take a picture of the clock, because you know it's not on time.
Mm-hmm.
We really, something different was going on that day. And when I got into the courtroom, it was again David Rucki's turn and his attorney to, we had closed out our case that day. We did still have, if we wanted to, a rebuttal. And we were planning on that. And I was in the middle of cross-examining the guardian. So it was about 10-ish. I was in the middle of cross-examining guardian. I had taken a picture, and I was taking a picture with a real camera, but I had a camera. And the deputies came. I took one picture in the courtroom, and the judge was not on the bench. I taken pictures before a court. I knew, it's not a record of the court that I'm making. Like I heard somebody say, you can play foosball in court while the judge isn't on the bench. You're not creating a record. And the deputies came and they took my camera and my cell phone. And I was probably okay with that. I mean, I didn't think, I said, okay, here you go. And at about 10-ish, I was cross-examining the guardian because the guardian's report came about on a Friday, and I think it was court ordered on a Monday. That's how fast it happened. And on that Friday, I was looking for a calendar so I could show the different dates that it was a Friday and a Monday. So the court said, well, let's do our morning break so that Michelle can go get her exhibit or her calendar or whatever she needs. And I thought, that's nice of him. And sort of. And he got up and he left the bench. And that's when 3 deputies came at me and actually took me away out of the courtroom and back to the holding cell. And back there, I was saying, what's going on? They were asking me my name. I said, you know my name. And ultimately, I started to cry. I started to call for my husband. I said,
I'm so sorry.
They said, that's it. And they actually stripped me down, took off my earrings, my hairpiece, all of my jewelry, including my wedding rings, necklaces, my shoes. They took a belt and put it around my waist and handcuffed me to the belt. And then they put me in the cell. And in the meantime, I'm in kind of a state of shock. And the deputies come back. They come back with a wheelchair. They sit me in the wheelchair. I understood I was kind of tied to the wheelchair. And they actually brought me out to sit in the courtroom. here I am, the attorney, in handcuffs, totally debilitated. And I get to the counsel table, and there's none of my paperwork is there. There's no pen, there's no paper. I'm handcuffed anyway. All of my files are gone. My client's gone. And the courtroom had been pretty much cleared out. And well, it was cleared out because it was canceled on the roster. The day before, it was a very full, packed courtroom. And that day, it was pretty sparse. So Judge Knudsen came back on the bench and said something must have happened during the break. And I remember saying something like, he said, "Can you call your client?" And I said, "They took my phone. What's going on?" And then he said, well, he cited some rule and said, "We're gonna have it anyway." So, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I proceeded to continue to cross-examine the guardian in that situation. I might have stopped cross-examining the guardian. I'm not, there's a transcript. I don't know that the transcript is accurate at all. The way they do transcripts in Dakota County at the time, and I don't think they've changed their tune, is they still, every other county here records it. You have a recording of a transcript. In Hennepin County, in Dakota County, they still do that ticker tape thing. So, and then they type it out. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So that's how they were doing things at that time. So I can't trust the record.
And that was September 11th and 12th of 2013. Right. And as Michelle pointed out, April 19th was when the girls ran. So this guy, Knudsen, held a custody trial with only 3 of the 5 kids. It doesn't matter where you give custody of the 2 girls. They were missing anyway. And so he was insistent on moving forward with this custody trial, even though all of his shenanigans caused 2 of the 5 kids to run. And who gets blamed? Sandra Grazzini-Rucki. It's absolutely remarkable, including in the press, most of the press. Primarily, this guy Broadcorp. 2020, I think we got time to talk about 2020. 2020 reached out to Sam and to Michelle. Well, to Michelle. Sam was in jail at that point. This will be her story. They presented it like they were going to tell the truth. They were given mountains of evidence of abuse. They ignored it all. They used like tricks by saying, well, we wanted police reports from during the marriage. No domestic violence victim, not no, but almost none would ever call the cops during the marriage. And then they ignored everything else, including other police reports, CPS reports, like the one of David sticking a gun to his then 8-year-old son's head. So that because they said we wanted this and they didn't have that, they used that as a reason to not present any of the other evidence, presented him as like the poor father and made it seem like he was the victim of parental alienation and she got what she deserved. First of all, here's how scummy 2020 is. They called it footprints in the snow because they said the girls ran and they left only footprints in the snow. Well, it was April 19th, 2013. Even in Minnesota, there was no snow. So they just made up a title. And then, and what else was I going to say about him? And then they asked to come to Michelle's place because they wanted to do like B-roll or like extra filming, and they presented it as one way. And then when it was cut, they made it seem like we came and asked for all of this evidence of abuse, and there was none there. So they misled all throughout. And one other point I'll make, there were 2 producers, Sean Dooley and Beth Mullen, and the host of the show was Elizabeth Vargas, and the president of ABC at the time was Channing Dungey. I emailed 4 of those people relentlessly. Only one is left at ABC, Sean Dooley. I don't know if it had anything to do with me, but I relentlessly emailed those 4 people, and only one is left.
Yeah, I remember there was a lot. There was, I think, hundreds of protests to the 2020, thousands wrote to 2020.
Yeah, thousands.
And Elizabeth Vargas is gone too.
Right, Vargas, right. The host is gone. Vargas left. She presumably it's a move up for her to now do cults on A&E because that's what she's doing. from 2020, or she left for other reasons. She left like 4 days after I emailed her and everybody else evidence that David Rucki was committing mortgage fraud, which I found out after the book was out. This guy, somehow after he regained control of the house, it got foreclosed on 6 times, and he still owns it. One time he bought it back, even though it was foreclosed on him. Somehow he's on both ends. So he was on something called Minnesota Cares, which is a program for low-income people. Even though he lives in a $500,000 mansion, he's gotten all sorts of public aid in the past. And one other thing, his daughter Gianna is on the University of Alabama rowing team. That girl never rowed a day in her life until she got to Alabama. And I don't think that's a club sport. I've asked the athletic department. I think that's a Lori Loughlin situation. But either way, that girl never rowed a day in her life until she got to Alabama, and now she's on their rowing team.
That $500,000 house is where Sandra was living.
Right, that they forced her out of.
It was disheveled, and it was, whatever they lied about. Probably messy like the house you could see behind me if you could see, or, here and there. So, yeah, it was very engineered in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't there a part where there was another house and they made her pay $233,000 or had her pay him $233,000 for part of it?
That's the
same house. She told me that she actually was required to pay off the mortgage, and she did. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you pay off a mortgage, you don't file the satisfaction against the house. So that's how it works. I mean, she paid it, and then the records might not have showed that she did. So it's a very, very, you have, that's part of the story as well.
No, I was wondering, because if there's like new information, do you think you might come out with a book too?
Oh yeah.
Maybe.
I know we've thought about it. Yeah, we thought about it because there's still so much to the story.
Right.
But
there was a lot. There was a lot that happened after we wrote the book. Though, as I said, we definitely tracked the criminal case very well, and the family court case, and we gave a lot of background and inside information on how the 2020 episode came about. I remember the other thing that 2020 did was when they came out, Sam had $1 million cash bond. They came out the first time, then they come out the second time, and in a part that obviously didn't air, they said, "We don't know what you're doing here, but we looked into it, and this bail is too high," and all of that. When they aired it, all they said was, "She has $1 million cash." So they made it seem like she's a master criminal when they looked into it, and they knew that she's being set up. That's how scummy 2020 is. And Elizabeth Vargas and her producers, Beth Mullen and Sean Dooley.
I have a little story about that. So she was being extradited, and I was in touch with Catherine Kina by email throughout the whole time, because Sandra was very afraid. And mm-hmm. things did happen while she was, basically in a cage.
Very bad thing.
Very bad thing. And
not only bad, but the crimes committed against her are 100, just on that car ride, are 100 times bad as the crime that they convicted of that Kina and the rest of her corrupt crew could care less about.
So listed on the, so I was watching the Register of Actions at this point, and listed on the Register of Actions was a hearing, and I had been in touch with Kina. Of course, she doesn't tell me this. Hearing at, I think it was at 11 a.m. Before Judge Knudsen on her criminal bail hearing. And that's another thing. I was flabbergasted. By the time I showed up at this hearing, the hearing had already taken place. I showed up at 11, but apparently they pushed her through at an earlier time. And Judge Knudsen did remove himself, and a Judge MacDonald actually pushed her through. She had no attorney at that hearing, and that's where they scheduled the $1 million bail. So she had
Right,
no.
and Judge McDonald is Erica McDonald, and until the new administration of Joe Biden took over, she was the U.S. attorney for the state of Minnesota. That corrupt piece of crap judge was made the federal prosecutor for the entire state of Minnesota. That's how it works over there. You do that kind of corruption, and you're moved up. And I know that's not the only time that Erica McDonald was involved in corruption. But she was rewarded by being the top prosecutor. The state of Minnesota has one U.S. attorney. It was her for a while.
So then that was, oh, and then when I went to the hearing, they said, oh, you need to file your certificate of representation. I said, I'm already, I've been in touch with all this piece of paper. Doesn't matter. When you are a criminal defense attorney, you show up. You are the criminal defense attorney, and that's what they had me do. And I went down to the clerk and did it in order to, I had to get the transcript that Judge MacDonald had over the weekend. I had to schedule another hearing on Monday, and that was with Judge Ashbon. She plays a role way down the road. But we actually had almost a day-long hearing where Sandra was there. I got all the information about, she had no criminal record whatsoever, zero criminal record. At this point, she had no arrearages and child support or any of that stuff. And had another hearing that took almost all day between going to see Sandra, and the bail got reduced to $750,000. And ultimately what happened is she was released because they kept her in for so long that Steve Grigsby just said, you got to release her now. You can't have somebody in jail for this long on bail. So she just got released without any bail. No bail.
Right. They played games with it. And then even though the crime was supposed to be presumed probation, Karen Asfog, same judge, who was on not just Sam's case, but all of the defendants in this so-called crime, who each had their own separate trials. And this is the woman who set up, when David Rucki got in trouble in 2009, when he was swearing uncontrollably at 2- and 3-year-olds, she made that case go away. Very corrupt judge. She once gave a 50-year protective order, which bars another woman, Didi Uvold, from mentioning David Rucki's name anywhere. It ends in 2069. That's how corrupt Karen Asfog is. I remember, I lost my train of thought, but the judge is extremely corrupt.
Yeah, there's something about the fact, and I heard he's a judge now. I'm not going to remember his name, but in Ferguson, remember that whole fiasco, Ferguson?
Right. Right.
He was talking about that case, and he did a PowerPoint and everything else because he was one of the investigators there, what have you. But in that case, the courthouse was next to the jail, was next to where you file paperwork for your real estate, was next to administration, just the city administration, and it was like this compound. And that's what you find in Hastings, Minnesota. And after 30 years, 40 years of existence, everybody just kind of knows what's going on. It's like they're all working, and that's what he pointed out was corrupt in the Ferguson, where the judges were just emailing things, and they were, giving people fines, but not everyone, those kinds of things. And that's Hastings, Minnesota. Dakota County,
right.
Main courthouse is right next to the jail where they took me, and I had been there with clients before to interview or what have you. Is right next to the um, city administration is right next to, the courthouse is there, and you go file your paperwork for real estate there and all of that. So that is there's too much of a blur.
I remembered what I was going to say. So the sentence that Karen Asfog gave Sam, so this is supposed to be a crime that's presumed probation, especially if you have no criminal record. Not only did she give her the maximum, but she said, and Sam at that point, even at the maximum, there's only a couple of months left because she made her sit in jail for 4 months or whatever it was in the beginning. You have to serve the rest 15 days at a time on the anniversary that your girls were found. And she berated her. And this is where the father's rights movement stepped in. Somebody made a YouTube video of it, and they've been sharing that thing for years because they're big on parental alienation like you are. So they think a woman got stuck and got what she deserved. And so they've been helping to smear Sam by sharing video of Karen Asfog, the same woman who in 2010, made David Rucki's other criminal matter go away. Absolutely a corrupt judge berating a woman, and they think it's swell. And so she gave her this bogus sentence, and the only time that I think anything that anyone's done to Sam was overturned. Eventually that sentence was made to be cruel and unusual punishment, and they had her re-sentence Sam. And that's what led to the second extradition. Because instead of saying, okay, fine, now it's time served, she said, well, then fine. First of all, it took Karen Asfog, I think, like 5 months to actually execute the sentence from the time that the appeals court said you had a cruel and unusual punishment sentence to her actually sentencing her. But Sam was at that point in Florida. She would not let Sam finish the sentence in Florida. She had her extradited. By the time they got back to Minnesota, there was like 3 or 4 weeks left. Instead of just letting her finish the sentence or just telling her the sentence is over, she made her go back to Minnesota and finish the sentence there. Karen Asfog, who would later then give David Rucki a 50-year protective order against Edie Uvold. She's like his personal judge. David Rucki has personal judges who are probably on his payroll. And she eventually retired. She's now a retired judge, which is what all judges want to be anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's something too about, first of all, jail. This is law school stuff, but there's 3 reasons to put somebody in jail. One is punishment. Mm-hmm. The second is rehabilitation, which doesn't happen nationally in our jails. As you might know, America jails more people than any other country. Mm-hmm. And the third is you are such a devious, harmful, horrible, you're going to get out there and really harm people that we need to keep you in jail. So those are the 3 reasons to keep you in jail. What they do right now is they'll sentence you, and then it's kind of a favor. This is what they did to Sandra as a favor. They're going to say, well, we're going to give you a year, and she had already served most of it, but we're going to put you on probation. And probation is kind of like you're in jail, but you're kind of still out there. Mm-hmm. And that's what they did. They said, but you're going to have to come back. I mean, who can get a job? Oh, sorry, I have to go back to Minnesota and serve for 15 days. Next year. Oh, sorry, I got to come back to, it would drag on. So that was the cruel and unusual punishment part. And so she came back, extradited a second time, as Michael says, and just served 2 months, and she was done. And when you are done, this is an education. When you are done with your jail time, there's no probation. You are done.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
So she's not on probation. She was done.
Mm-hmm. Right. They were desperate to keep her on probation too. Yes. And they were trying to figure out ways to violate and all kinds of, and when I say they, I actually mean mostly Michael Broadcorp calling all around He chases her, he does everything, and he's like David Rucki's personal propagandist, and this is what he does. In fact, Michelle they retaliate against everyone. Michelle had her license threatened because there was a $50 dispute with one client. She said something about Judge Knudsen that they deemed inappropriate, and she filed a lawsuit that they thought may be frivolous. And so Broadcorp was, because the lawsuit was against Broadcorp, but he was testifying and he said his job is to follow this case. I don't know how you can make money following the case naturally. The only way you can make money is if someone pays you, and the only one who benefits from anything and everything that Michael Broadcorp writes is David Rucki. And he lives in a big house, so he seems to be making a lot of money. Someone is paying it. He didn't make it on his book. That website has absolutely zero advertising. Someone's paying him to do this. There's only one person who benefits. Look, this guy goes to every single court hearing. He one time admitted that he reads everything I write about the case, listens to every show, like he'll listen to this show that I do or that others do. Who does that obsessively unless someone is paying you? So David Rucki basically paid off a propagandist to write propaganda on his behalf. He's probably bought off a whole bunch of judges, cops, who knows how many. And that's how he accomplished this.
Mm-hmm.
So we're coming upon...
20, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're coming upon the hour, Marianne. So,
right.
Do you have any other questions or final comments?
Well, this has just been very fascinating. That, where are these girls now? Are they?
Well, Gianna is at the University of Alabama. I don't know where Samantha is at, but Gianna is enjoying life at the University of Alabama as a rower.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and by the way, on her rowing website, she lists her mom as Sam Grazzini. I don't know how many of you even know your mom's maiden name, but that's how she lists her mom. But it's an improvement. In 2019, she didn't even list that she has a mom. So at least now Gianna acknowledges she has a mother, though somehow she says Sam Grazzini. That's what she says is her mom's name. Her mom's nickname, everyone does call her Mom Sam, and her mom's maiden name, that's how she refers to her mom.
Okay. And all of the children have aged out at this point. I think at the time of that draconian...
There's one kid who's under 18. None of them have seen their mom. Even though David Rucki said in 2020 he was going to make sure that the kids would have a relationship with mom. He failed in that, I guess. Or maybe he was just giving lip service to 2020. They did, by the way, 2020 missed that. They didn't ask him later on, well, so how is the relationship between mom and the kids? In fact, Sean Dooley was surprised that mom hadn't seen the kids. He thought that everything would be worked out after he did a hatchet job on Sam. He thought it would work out. After he hid evidence of abuse, turned the victim into the perpetrator, he actually was surprised that Sam had still not seen her kids. That's the kind of scumbag Sean Dooley is. That's the only producer from 2020 who's still left at 2020 of the four who I emailed pretty relentlessly. He's the only one. He was surprised that the family had not repaired itself after he did a hatchet job on their story. He was surprised by that.
And we all know the real news is shows like yours, Marianne, because
right.
unedited, we get to be,
right.
That's
right. By the way, Sean Dooley, I emailed him originally right after the show came out. He gave me an 800-word response. He's never responded to any other email after that. You look really bad when you respond with 800 words and then pretend like the person never emails you again. That doesn't look good. So, that's how he is. That response is still online somewhere.
That's I think a lot of the corruption, Mary and Mike, is the non-responsiveness. I mean, I've seen it in court where you'll be making an argument, the other side won't even argue back. They'll be non-responsive, and then the judge will just kind of do what the judge wants to do because they're
Because there aren't any real
non-responsiveness
rules.
is a huge indicator that something isn't exactly right, even if you respond somehow.
Yeah, like with a motion to compel,
Right.
then they maybe finally will do something once you file the motion to compel.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad
Are we
I had
wrapping
you.
up?
Sure. I was going to say, do you foresee book 2 coming out at some point? Because it'd be interesting.
We'll
I would
see.
like to, I think my goal is, the books were published by familycourt.com. We're putting together a website for familycourt.com so we can market these books and actually let people know about family innocence, the restorative circle mediation side and the legal side, rather than kind of a mix. So my goal is to get this book out there first, because we haven't, Mike will tell you this, we give it away. We haven't really marketed it to the extent that it needs to be marketed. And now
we are now on Marianne's show, so
we are
doing it.
Because of you, Marianne, we are marketing their book.
I'll do anything to help. Believe me.
Thank you.
So, okay. I'll now have you guys back on again in the future. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in the family courtrooms and criminal courtrooms. And I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again in the future for another exciting episode with you two. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marianne.
All right, that was good. When is it coming out? Later today?
It'll be out today.